The focus of the Republican Party on turning back the clock for women really is something that's unacceptable.
Right now, a war on women? Well, not just that Democrat, but many are saying that the GOP is turning back the clock on human rights. But the Grand Old Party says the controversy is a manufactured one. Who's right and who's wrong here? We'll hear from the president of the National Organization for Women. And next,
if I were elected and Congress were to pass the DREAM Act, would I veto it? And the answer is yes.
the Latino vote. Mitt Romney's got a serious problem if you look at the numbers relating to Latino voters. Who's going to be able to capture this crucial voting bloc? And later,
Mitt Romney calls and wants to discuss it with me. I will sit down and talk with Governor Romney about it.
well, how kind of you, Mr. Governor. Well, he'll pick up the phone if Mitt comes a-calling. The Veep stakes have begun. We'll talk not just about Christie's chances, but will the VP pick really be a game changer? Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and thank you so much for joining us this Wednesday evening, April 18th. We've got a lot to get to this hour, but at the top of the show, we're going to be focusing on this election and really on two principal constituencies that are going to be crucial here when it comes to this year's election. I'm talking about women and Latinos. We're going to hear from key players from both groups, and we're going to bring you the latest from the campaign trail. And while new poll numbers show Obama and Romney in a statistical dead heat, Romney lags big time when it comes to these two very important groups. Again, we're talking about women and Latinos. We'll show you the numbers and we'll get into the issues. Outstanding question here is for Mitt Romney, can he control the damage done by his own party in what has been a bruising primary in time here to sway voters come November? And obviously only time will tell. All right, in the first position though is the GOP's war on women.
If the Democrats said we had a war on caterpillars and every mainstream media outlet talked about the fact that Republicans have a war on caterpillars, then we'd have problems with caterpillars. I mean, the fact of the matter is it's a fiction.
Well, that was the chairman of the Republican National Committee earlier this month comparing what the Democrats say is that Republican war on women to a war on caterpillars. Since then, he not only hadn't apologized for those comments, but he's doubled down on it. Now, this comes in the midst of sinking support for the Republican Party among women. I want you to take a look at these numbers. Recent poll, Obama ahead of Romney, just again the female vote by almost 20 points. That's Obama's largest margin to date among women. And Obama, he's leading Romney about 14 points when it comes to the independent voters, female independent voters in those key swing states. Now, it's a group here that favored Romney as recently as last fall. And the highly polarized and highly publicized recent debate over contraception, that could play a large role in the numbers you just saw. Now, for the Republicans' waning support among women, they talk about not just battle over contraception, but also dollars and cents. We'll get into all of that. So, could moves like Governor Scott Walker's repeal of Wisconsin Equal Pay Enforcement Act and the fact that states have passed about 90 some odd provisions and imposed limits on abortion just last year alone, well, will those things play into 2012? If you talk to Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, he says that the war on women is a, quote, manufactured issue. Well, we're going to talk to our guest to see if she agrees. Joining us now to talk about this, Terry O'Neill, the president of the National Organization for Women. She's joining us live out of our nation's capital. Thank you very much for a few minutes. I appreciate it.
Hi, Richard. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Help me out here. The numbers seem to say a story that women aren't too crazy. Is it about Mitt Romney or is it about the GOP?
It's both. Mitt Romney supports the Personhood Amendment, which would actually not only criminalize all abortion, even abortions necessary to save a woman's life, but would also criminalize many of the most popular forms of birth control. And for a presidential candidate to wish to criminalize birth control, he is never going to get the women's vote if he keeps that up. Well, he can take steps to improve his image amongst women, but because he's got an uphill battle, he really needs to get out there and be very clear. He needs to condemn, not support the Personhood Amendment. He needs to take the birth control pledge, saying that he will do everything in his power to make birth control available to all women universally. It is fundamental to women's basic preventive health care, and he needs to say that he understands that. And finally, You know, he's been going around the country criticizing Barack Obama for his economic policies and the impact they're having on women. But he supports Rick Perry and Mitch Daniels and Scott Walker and other governors who were swept into office with the big Tea Party movement in 2010. And those governors are the ones that have been responsible for the vast majority of job losses by women. Job losses of women. So Mitt Romney needs to condemn those pals of his and get them to change their policies if he really wants to improve his standing with women.
Let me get to the dollars and cents in a little bit, but first let's stay on, you know, what I say are the culture wars. And forget about principle for a minute. Politically, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen here. Why fight a fight when economy and jobs are issue number one? I don't understand. That being said, I'm curious. Have you guys found that it's contraception, restrictions on abortion, that's the big, you know, lightning rod, or is it stuff that they don't want to renew the Violence Against Women Act, or that people want to redefine what a victim is as a victim? What are the issues in the culture war front that have really ticked off women, maybe more so than the general public realizes?
I think it's really the attack on birth control and the attack on Planned Parenthood, which is really an attack on birth control. Women are infuriated by these attacks on birth control. And you saw when the Susan G. Komen Foundation tried to implicate politics around birth control in breast cancer, you saw the tsunami of protest against that. Women and men don't want attacks on birth control, and I think that clearly the Republican Party doesn't understand that. But once people were paying attention to the attacks on birth control, then they noticed that there has been this extraordinary and extreme spike in attacks not just on birth control but on other aspects of women's reproductive health, and not just abortion. But the Republicans have consistently, since the beginning of 2011, tried to cut back funding for family planning clinics, which provide mammograms and cervical cancer screenings and HIV STD screening. So all of those aspects of reproductive health care for women have been attacked. And once people started paying attention, they got angrier and angrier and angrier about this relentless attack on all these aspects of women's health.
How much of this is that you got a bunch of old white guys deciding what's right for women? Are the optics partly to blame here?
Oh, sure. I mean, just think of Darrell Issa declaring that contraception is not about women. It's about Catholic priests and other religious extremists who want to prevent women from taking birth control. Who knew that contraception, wasn't about women? And refusing to allow Sandra Fluke simply to offer testimony to Congress about how birth control was important to her and to women of her age. So, yeah, those optics are a real problem. But the reality is that the vast majority of men in this country support women's full and universal access to birth control.
Then Terry, explain this to me, though. This is what I don't get. I get the outrage now, and I get the poll numbers. But you go across this country, not just in the reddest of red states, but some of the restrictions. And, for example, one state even initiated that it would be legal to try and kill an abortion practitioner for performing an abortion. Didn't become law, but it was actually entered in at a state level here. But we have seen a lot of pushback for the restrictions, mandates. Where has the outrage been if all the poll numbers seem to say the public doesn't want it, and moreover, even overall the general population doesn't want it? Why do these laws keep getting passed state after state?
I think it's because it's at the state level, and there's been local media coverage of it, but it doesn't really sort of break into the national consciousness when it's happening at the state level. In Virginia, those ultrasound bills, which, by the way, several bills had already passed and become law in a number of states, and when it hit Virginia, it was like the cumulative weight of this extraordinary state-by-state effort to block women's access to reproductive health care. Sort of this cumulative weight of it kind of tumbled, and the national media started paying attention, and then people around the country started paying attention. And you're absolutely right, Rich. These measures are extremely unpopular with ordinary people. 1,500 women showed up in Richmond, Virginia to line the sidewalk as the legislators had to walk in to vote on that mandatory ultrasound bill. The women were standing there in this gauntlet of a silent protest.
But it still passed.
That's remarkable.
But it still passed. That's the part that surprised me.
The bill passed. The governor was shamed into removing the requirement of a transvaginal probe for the ultrasound requirement. It is still a terrible bill. We call it the ritualized humiliation of women, which is exactly what it is and what it's intended to be. The bill still passed. Look, since 2010, and some before this, but in 2010 we seem to sort of have faced a real sort of perfect storm, if you will. Women's voting participation plummeted in 2010 compared to what it had been in 2008. And at the same time, in 2010, we saw the first effects of the Citizens United case that allowed untold business dollars to go into elections throughout the United States. And as a result, you have Tea Party extremists, real hard-right extremists flooding in not only to the United States Congress but also into state legislatures. And so we're seeing the effects of that, the attacks on unions in Wisconsin and in Indiana and in Michigan, and the attacks on women's health care across the board in the states, the attacks on voter participation across the states.
I'm up against a break here, but I want to ask, I've seen a lot of people say this is as bad as it's gotten in recent memory in terms of rollback of women's rights. I'm just curious, between now and November, not just with NOW, but other groups, is there going to be a major concerted effort here to impact the November vote here? Certainly along, if you believe the polls here, are they going to get women out to vote in major numbers? Are we going to be surprised as the consequences for some of these policies?
Look, we're up against huge money because of Citizens United, but the women's organizations are really pulling out all the stops to get the word out about what is at stake for women in the 2012 elections. The National Organization for Women is partnering with groups like the American Association of University Women and the Feminist Majority Foundation to get that word out. Go to hervotes.us. It's 55 women's organizations have come together for a social media effort to get the word out that way. We're doing everything we can because we cannot truly, women will not be able to withstand another electoral disaster like what we saw in 2010. And Citizens United has changed the game fundamentally in ways that I think we're only just now beginning to understand.
Terry, I appreciate a few minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard.
All right, everybody, we're going to jump to a quick break. When we come back, though, we're going to have a lot more on the election. And before we go, I want to remind you to sound off on the issue we just discussed here on a Facebook page. Just go to facebook.com/Richard French Live. And here's the question for you. Is the GOP war on women real? Republican Party obviously says no way. Our guest and many others say yes, in fact, it is very real. We're going to read your comments in an upcoming episode. But when we come back, we're going to focus on another key constituency, Latinos. We're going to hear from the League of United Latin American Citizens and our panel. They also join us to sound off how do all this stuff play into who our next president is going to be. Stay with us.